to the Trailblazer Talks podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Hope Wilson. This podcast is designed to encourage and equip you to be a trailblazer right where you are, to help you discover your God-given purpose and bring you talks each week that will inspire you to do what you were made for. Each week, we will walk through different topics to help you grow in your life, career, and leadership. My hope is that you'll become poised for purpose and walk in that daily. I hope each week you'll feel more equipped to be a trailblazer right where you are. So let's get into this week's episode. Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of the podcast. I'm so glad that you're here and I hope that this week's episode can be helpful to you. I originally was going to do a series starting this week on relationships just for the month of February, but I really felt like this message might be more helpful for today, and then I can always start the relationship series next week. But I just know for my own life, I have been feeling overwhelmed and that there's just so much on my plate and my mind has just felt cluttered and overstimulated. And I know that I'm not alone in that because so many people that I've talked to recently have felt the same way. And it's difficult because we're just constantly being inundated with information, whether it's on social media or the news or just life in general. There's just always constantly so much going on and we have so much on our plates. And I think in today's world, it's harder and harder to find those like peaceful, restful moments unless we're intentional about it. And so that's kind of what I want to talk about today is like refilling our cup and finding rest and also doing some things to quiet the noise. Because I know for me, I was having a hard time even trying to decide what to come up with for the next podcast series and just the next podcast. And I almost didn't record an episode for today because I just had so much going on around my house with different unexpected projects that popped up. And I couldn't quite get a clear mind of like what to even do a podcast on and then getting in my head because there's so many podcasts out there. There's so many people, coming to you with information that I started questioning, whether I should even do the podcast or not. And so it's just, there's constant thoughts bombarding our minds and it can feel overwhelming and our brains can feel foggy and cluttered. And I don't know if you relate to that, but if you do, this episode is for you. And I know for me, like my brain can feel very crowded and foggy at times if I haven't given it the space to like calm down and relax. And I know too, I also struggle with anxiety and that probably plays a big part into my mind feeling cluttered a lot of times because I struggle with my thoughts kind of feeling like if you think of a can of Coke, if you shake it up and it has so many bubbles rushing around, that's kind of like the inside of a brain of someone who struggles with anxiety is whenever anxiety is heightened, it feels like someone shook up a Coke can and the bubbles just are constant and the bubbles are similar to our thoughts, just racing until they calm down. But lately I've just been feeling like I can't seem to catch up. I feel behind, just one thing after another. And I was planning to go ahead and do some of these podcasts ahead of time and record episodes more in advance. But then this past week, I was getting new windows installed at the condo that I rent. And in the midst of them installing the windows, one, they had problems with just installing the windows. They realized that the way this was built, they like somehow built the windows into the brick. And so they had to cut them out. So that was a problem and took longer than expected. And then when they got to the last window that they were installing, they found a lot of old termite damage. And I was just like, oh my gosh, like really, why? I just wanted new windows because the old ones were leaking and gross and they didn't even work properly. So it's been a mess, y'all, just trying to navigate that. And there's been people at my house and it's been loud and messy and just stuff everywhere, having to move a bunch of stuff so they can like work on the window and work on the wood. They had to remove the old wood, take down like the old drywall, and then they had to reinstall the wood that was damaged and reinstall the drywall. And they're still not finished, but thankfully they're done for today and I was able to record this episode without a bunch of noise behind me. But I say all that just to say that it's just hard. There's just constantly stuff being thrown at us, whether it's expected or unexpected. It feels like life is just never ending. And for me, it causes me to feel like I can't think straight. I feel like I've been overwhelmed with all that's on my plate to do. And so in the midst of all that, I realize that I so often forget to just bring it all to Jesus, or I just say like a quick flippant prayer of like, God, please help me. But I'm not like taking a moment to really spend that time with God. And I know that other friends and other people have like communicated that to me, that they also feel the same way. And it's also been hard for us too here. Just a little like life update, because my boyfriend and I were trying to find the right church home here. And it's been hard just trying to make friends and find community in this season and find the church that's right for us. We've tried a lot of different churches and we are hoping to like find the right church home, but it's just hard. It's hard not being in a community with other believers consistently and trying to kind of start over with that from the church that we had gone to previously, where we had so many friends and had so much community. And so it's just hard. There's just all kinds of different things going on. And I'm sure you can relate to that with all the many different things that were going on in your life and that you have on your plate currently in this season too. And like I said, I so quickly forget to bring it to God. I realize sometimes that, I pray about it, but I don't spend the time with God like I should. And I'm trying to be better about that, because I used to be so good at that. And I feel like the busier the season, the harder it is to like set aside time to just quiet myself. And I also say that too, because I feel like that might be freeing to someone today, because I think sometimes we see different leaders on social media and people who are leading different ministries on social media, and we think, wow, like they must have a perfect relationship with God. They do all the right things. Like they must get up every morning and spend like an hour with God. And, but nobody has a perfect relationship with God. Nobody has a perfect routine or anything like that. And I think it's good to remember that everyone is trying their best. We're all trying to do our best to spend time with God in a way that works best with us. And we're all trying to manage this thing called life. And so I think it's important to remember that with leaders, because so often I think we can feel like other people have it perfect. Other people are doing so well and they must like really hear from God all the time. And I think it's important to remember that we all have our own struggles, and sometimes we forget to go to God too. And sometimes we, get to the end of our struggle and we're like, oh, I need to talk to God about this. But I can attest that I always do feel so much lighter and so much better when I do go to God and when I do quiet myself and when I do spend that intentional time with Him. And so I hope that encourages you just to know that you're not alone if you feel like you're struggling with finding time with God and trying to navigate all of that. Like, just feel free to know that do the best that you can. We're all doing our best too, and we're trying to be as consistent as we can, but don't feel like you're struggling in your relationship with God just because it doesn't look like somebody else's. So as I was thinking through all these different things, I was thinking about what are the ways that we can refill our cups and be intentional with that. And what are some of the ways that we can quiet the noise? And as I was thinking through this, I thought of some different ways that might be helpful for us. And I will say that I'm not currently doing all of these things perfectly. Like, these are things that I need to implement right now in my own life. And so we're in this together. We're both starting fresh today, you and I, as we listen to this episode. So one of the first things that I realized that I need to do is I need to assess the areas that are draining me. I need to assess, do I have too much on my plate? Are there areas where I need to have better boundaries? Are there areas that I need to trim down with what's on my plate? Am I doing too much in this season that's not allowing me to have that rest and to feel like my cup is being refilled? And I will say there's a difference in doing nothing and having intentional rest, because there's definitely been times where I've just been lazy and just watched TV or whatever, but I don't feel any better after doing that. I don't feel any better when I'm just doing nothing. And there's a difference in just like laying down and watching TV and like having intentional rest where it refills your cup. And I've referenced this book before, but I wanted to bring it back up because I think it's so helpful and it's something that I need to pull back out too and read through. But there's a book that's called Sacred Rest, and it has some great ways to like refill your cup. There's 7 different areas of rest that she talks about in that book, and it's something that I would definitely recommend reading if you're feeling overwhelmed and feeling like you need more rest and you need to refill your cups. That's the first thing we need to do, is assess the areas that are draining us. The next thing that I feel like we need to do is to think about the things that refill us. And we have to find a way to do some of those things weekly and monthly. And we have to intentionally make space for those things, because if we don't intentionally make space, it's just not going to happen. So think about the things that really refill you. Think about the areas where you would feel refilled, whether it's emotionally that you feel drained, or physically, or creatively, like whatever those areas are. And again, you can reference like Sacred Rest or look up the 7 different areas of rest on there. But those are the areas where we have to intentionally refill our cup. And once we figure out ways to do those, we need to be diligent in finding ways to refill our cup weekly and monthly. And then the next thing I would also advise us on is spending consistent time with God in prayer and worship and quietness and giving Him our burdens. I think so often we go to Him last because we just don't think to do it first, or like maybe we don't realize that we're being drained, and so we like just try to fix it ourselves. But I realize whenever I go to God first, and whenever I like come to Him and spend time with Him, and spend time in the Word and spend time in prayer and just worship and just quieting myself, I feel so much better, and I feel like my thoughts are more clear, and I don't feel quite so overwhelmed. And the more time that we spend with God, the less we feel overwhelmed. And then the other thing that I would say, and this is a big one for myself, is spending less time on social media and taking time to limit our time on social media and putting some boundaries to it. This is something that I really need to implement, is not getting on social media first thing in the morning and not getting on it like right before bed. Like I need more boundaries with that area so that I'm not being overwhelmed the minute I wake up and right before I go to bed. Because I realize when I do that, when I like open my phone first thing in the morning and I'm constantly like all of a sudden being overstimulated, because that's what social media does. It really overstimulates us because we're just flipping through so many different pieces of information. It makes me feel chaotic in the morning, and I start off my morning feeling overwhelmed. And then if I do scroll social media right before bed, which so often I do, and a lot of times I'm just like, oh, I'm just, trying to relax, but it really isn't relaxing, because again, it's overstimulating our brains. Whether we realize it or not, it's an overstimulation. And so then it makes it harder to go to sleep because it's just too much noise. So I would really encourage us to work on spending less time on social media and spending more intentional time whenever we are on social media, so that we're not overwhelming ourselves so much. And then another thing is just remembering to give yourself grace. Like, don't let this journey of trying to refill your cup and quiet the noise be another stressor. Like, don't let this overwhelm you in the process of trying to find that peace. Like, give yourself grace. We don't need to be perfect. We just need to be intentional. And a couple last things that I would encourage you with is limit the notifications on your phone. Like, set times where you're not being inundated with those notifications. Set boundaries with your phone, and like, you need to rule your phone rather than your phone ruling you. We can quiet the notifications. We can set parameters on our phone so that only the most important people can get through to us in the case of an emergency. But we don't have to constantly have our phone notifying us of things. Like, we have to have boundaries with our phones, because every time our phone rings, or dings or gives us a notification, that's a stimulation. Like, that's stimulating us and overwhelming us, and we have to be able to have boundaries with that. And then a couple last things are having a consistent routine so that you don't have to think about those items as much. Like, having a consistent morning routine so you don't have to think about it. Having a consistent bedtime routine so you don't have to think about it. Having these consistent things in place so that the things that take up more of your brain space can have that brain space, and you don't have to constantly think about, oh my gosh, I'm running late. Oh, I have to do this. Or I have to brush my teeth. Or I have to get this before I run out of the house. Like, allow those things to be a consistent, normal part of your routine so that you're not having to think about how you're doing them. And then lastly, I would say create a peaceful atmosphere in your home so that it can feel like a safe sanctuary. That's something that I've tried really hard to do in my home, is create a safe, peaceful space and a calm space at home so that I don't feel overstimulated by my house. And it's hard right now because my house is like semi under construction. And so I don't feel super peaceful in my house right this second because it's a little bit of a construction zone. But normally, like, I try really hard to keep a clean home and keep clutter down and things like that so that I can feel peaceful in my home and not feel overwhelmed by it. So whatever that looks like for you with your home to like create a peaceful atmosphere that just feels calm and intentional, I would highly encourage you to do that in your house. So those are a lot of different things that we can work on to refill our cups and to quiet the noise. And hopefully this episode helps you feel less alone in your own struggles. Hopefully it helps you feel seen in whatever you're going through right now. And I hope that it also gives you some tools in your tool belt to continue working on these areas of your own life. And just remember, we're going through this together. We're working on these together, and you're not alone in the things that you're struggling with. So I hope that this episode was helpful. I'll be back next week, and I'll either be doing the relationship series next week, or it might be a surprise. I might change my mind and do something different, but I hope you'll join me next week. And if you haven't yet, make sure that you're subscribed to the podcast. And if you could leave a rating and a review, I would really love that. And also, if you wouldn't mind to continue to share on social media as I try to grow the show and reach more people, that would really be helpful to me. And if there's specific things that you want to hear episodes on, feel free to reach out to me either on Instagram, or you can reach out to me at hello@thetrailblazerjournals.com. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you back here next week.